Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here and to contribute to this event. My remarks will be centered around my own country of Barbados and the Caribbean community, CARICOM, which is the grouping of Caribbean nations that Barbados is a member of. CARICOM is a grouping of 15 full member states and 5 associate member states. The associate members are territories that are still colonies of Britain. Barbados has a long-standing connection to Cuba. At the time of the construction of the Panama Canal, many Barbadians, Black Barbadians that is, because Barbados, having been a slave society, it was a very brutish place for the masses of Black people. So at the time of the building of the Panama Canal, thousands, tens of thousands of Barbadians migrated to Panama to work. And when the canal was finished, many of them then made their way to Cuba to find employment in the sugarcane industry in Cuba. So there's still today a significant Barbadian element among the Cuban population, to be found in places like Baragua and Guantanamo in particular. Fast forward to 1972, Barbados is now an independent country, and Barbados, along with its fellow Caribbean countries, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana, all newly independent countries, the smallest countries of the the smallest independent countries of the Western Hemisphere. They defy, the United States government and the OAS, and insist on extending diplomatic and other recognition to Cuba. And that is seen as a very important act, because at that time, 1972, all of the countries of this hemisphere, with the exception of Canada and Mexico, had terminated their relations with Cuba, and Cuba was subject to a policy of isolation. 1972, fast forward to 1975. We take great pride in Barbados that we played a role in the beginning phases of Operation Carlotta, when Cuba answered the call of Angola to send troops to fortify the independence of Angola against UNITA rebels and the South African racist apartheid military. Cuba needed an intermediate point to make that journey from Cuba across the Atlantic to West Africa. And the first country that Cuba asked to serve as that staging point was in fact Barbados. And between October of 1975 and December of 1975, for a 3-month period, Barbados was in fact the country that was clandestinely used as that stepping stone for Cuban troops. The Cuban planes would land in Barbados, refuel in Barbados, and then make the journey across the Atlantic. Of course, eventually the Americans found out about this, and made a big issue out of it, and Barbados had to pull back. But by then, the number of that 3-month period was critical, because by then enough troops had landed in Angola, and just in time really, to turn back the rebels that were advancing on the capital of Angola. And then, of course, 1976, 6th of October, the Cubana terrorist tragedy, which every Barbadian who was conscious in 1970, who was alive and of age of consciousness in 1976, remembers that incident. It really struck the Barbadian people very hard. All 73 passengers on the plane died, but the Barbadian people had to carry out the horrendous task of retrieving the mangled and dismembered bodies from the waters of the Caribbean Sea. And so every year since then, since 1976, we commemorate this great tragedy in Barbados. And in 1998, the government of Barbados constructed a monument in commemoration of the tragedy. Fidel Castro came to Barbados in 1998 to, in a sense, inaugurate the monument. And so ever since then, ever since 1998, that monument is where we gather to commemorate the tragedy. And we gathered again this year, today in fact. And I want to tell you that for us in CARICOM, in the Caribbean community, one of the givens of our foreign policy is solidarity with Cuba. We have been extending that solidarity with Cuba from the very beginnings of CARICOM. In fact, in 1972, when the decision was made by the 4 then independent Caribbean territories to recognize Cuba, simultaneously, the decision was made to establish CARICOM. So from the very beginning of CARICOM, right through to today, Cuba, solidarity with Cuba, and the advancing of a demand that blockade be terminated, that is a staple of CARICOM's policy.